The prince surprises Petrov, asking if he's interested in taking charge of Longsong. He explains they need someone or a family to oversee the territory. If the Honeysuckle family wants in, they'll be taxed by Border Town, which is 30% of their revenue plus 1,000 gold royal worth of goods and materials. Well, that's a tempting offer. Petrov thinks to himself as the prince casually lays a hand on his shoulder, hinting at the allure of power and opportunity the Honeysuckle family have. Roland suggests this could be Petrov's shot at real influence, but he's got a few questions first. First up, Roland asks how Petrov plans to handle any opposition. Anxious, Petrov counters with questions by asking the prince about his estimates of revenue and taxes of Longsong. The prince calmly insists that this is not his headache, and asks Petrov how he will ensure that monthly 1,000 worth of goods and materials, and what kind of steps he would take to make sure of the revenue target. Roland slaps the ransom terms in front of the redhead, signaling Knight Carter to escort him out. With a cunning smile, he shakes goodbye to that poor guy and tells him he'll be waiting for his answer if he genuinely wants to manage the place considering all the conditions. He also reminds him not to forget about the hefty ransom for his father. Well, Nightingale sure caught him off guard with her sudden appearance. She pointed out how the ambassador seemed pretty sincere and truthful. Prince Roland, feeling a bit embarrassed and blushing, quickly looked away as she leaned in closer. He agreed with her, admitting he used to think nobles were just lazy pleasure seekers, but he's impressed by the Honeysuckle family's business skills. As Nightingale leaned even closer, holding him in her grasp, she whispered softly, her warm breath tickling his ear, asking if he really didn't want to stick around in Longsong Fortress. But before he could answer, she darted off and reappeared before him, reminding him to consider Longsong's wealth and how prosperous this place is compared to Border Town. Roland shakes his head in response, explaining that Longsong is deep in political roots, which makes it tough to revolutionize here. So he'd rather stick with his Border Town and play Anno 1800 and keep on expanding. Not to mention, the influence of the church here runs deep, and discrimination against witches would be at its peak. He's always maintained that he wants all witches to roam freely on the streets, something he can only achieve in Border Town. The girl admires his noble ideals, her heart racing as she struggles to control her impulses. Suddenly, she loses control, grabbing our hero and pulling him close until they're both blushing and they share a kiss. After that slimy and slippery smooch, she quickly steps back, leaving the prince feeling utterly embarrassed. She suddenly disappears as Knight Carter appears, announcing that High Priest Tylo of the Longsong Fortress Church wishes to meet him. Prince Roland, still blushing from the earlier encounter, gives Knight Carter the go-ahead to allow the priest in. Shortly after, Inquisitor Tylo arrives in the office and promptly greets their new ruler. He explains that he's here to pay his respects on behalf of the Holy City. As they settle in, Prince Roland is surprised that the church does not seem bothered by the death of Duke Ryan and by the new ruler of the Longsong. The priest shrugs it off, saying the church usually stays out of political squabbles as long as the king governs justly and improves the lives of his people. He adds, with a knowing look, that they don't care where the king came from either. With his usual sass, Roland asks if Tylo's only here to give blessings. The priest smirks and says that's just part of it, and he's got a proposition that might pique Roland's interest. The priest tells Roland he's willing to assist in expanding his territory. Roland, though, reminds him of the church's stance on staying out of political clashes and secular disputes. The priest clarifies that while they usually keep their distance, they can't ignore everything. He explains that the conflict between Timothy and Princess Garcia has stirred up the southern region, and the church wants to back a king with strong moral values to bring peace back swiftly. He acknowledges that Roland's actions have made positive waves across the western region, and everyone is aware of it. Oh, the church will be rooting for our hero to progress forward. But since they don't want to get deep into political stuff, the priest offers to help the prince by providing material aid. He then rummages through his coat and throws a box, stating that this is a special medicine produced by the Holy City. He tells our hero to accept this as a goodwill gesture from the church. The boy picks up the pill curiously and examines it closely. The priest explains that the red pill grants temporary incredible strength, while the black pill enhances pain tolerance and resistance to extreme temperatures. After the priest leaves, Roland reflects on the church's approach to cozying up to him and giving their support. He turns to Nightingale and asks if she can discern if the priest was truthful or not, but she explains she couldn't penetrate his thoughts as there was black void due to the divine stone of judgment he carried. Upon inspecting the pills with her fog ability, she notes they seem surrounded by a black void, similar to the divine stone of judgment, but it doesn't appear to affect her abilities like the stone does. She figures they could test those pills on some poor soul already on death row to check their effectiveness. Meanwhile, our hero is confused why the church wants him to fight his siblings to seize the crown, especially after Garcia's victory in the Battle of Eagle City. He is certain that battling his siblings for the crown will only drain Grey Castle dry, and wonders whether the church aims to instill fear in the populace to strengthen its influence. He blows off all that politics and decides to clean up Longsong Fortress. By using its loot, he plans to beef up Border Town with machinery and other stuff. 3 days later, we're back in the Borderlands, and Night Carter's wondering if handing Longsong Fortress over to the Honeysuckle family is a smart move. Prince Roland is all confidence, saying they won't dare break the contract. Even if they did, he will gladly take down Longsong once again. Besides, he trusts their business-doing skills, and he is hoping that they will give him surprising results. Then, the lady spots folks in the distance, and Roland confirms they're the first batch of serfs sent from Longsong. He explains their generational bondage to the land, enduring harsh lives under the whip and control of their masters. This grim reality saddens the lady, but Roland assures her they'll provide for their basic needs and work towards freeing them. He pledges to eradicate slavery entirely in the years to come, offering hope to these oppressed people. As their boat nears the shore, the prince catches a funky smell from the seaside, causing his face to go pale as he realizes it's the unmistakable odor of literal shit. He immediately starts vomiting rainbows, hands trembling, and tells Carter that today he's going to make the most impactful decision in the history of Border Town. "Yes, that's right," he declares emphatically. "We absolutely need toilets on every corner of Border Town immediately." The others present are startled by this revelation as the prince explains that the first toilet will be placed near the serfs' wooden sheds. He insists on enforcing a law that requires people to use the sheds for shitting, and he wants the area opposite the Redwater River to be designated as an industrial zone, free from any unpleasant odors. The knight, not really familiar with the whole toilet thing, wonders aloud why they need a special spot just for taking a dump. He figures people can enjoy nature while they take a dump outside. Besides, people are really used to working in funky smells and all. The prince gets where he's coming from, remembering how he used to shrug off hygiene too. But now he's all about setting up toilets and teaching folks to stay clean to avoid getting sick. Then the old man chimes in, asking what they're going to do with all that collected poop. The prince says they'll stash it for farming as fertilizer. The old advisor and Night Carter are completely creeped out. The mere thought of spreading human waste in their fields and then eating food grown with that fertilizer is making them gag uncontrollably. As they puke rainbows, the prince explains that these feces can be used as fertilizer for farming, especially with Sister Leaf's improved wheat seeds, which will exponentially boost yield and growth rates. While he's saying this, Lady Leaf can't help but notice loud noises coming from the prince's room, telling those dorks to puke outside. Later that night, our hero falls asleep while Nightingale appears to tuck him in with blankets. She feels a warmth in her eyes every time she sees him. She disappears immediately and gets back into her own room. Wendy catches on quickly, noting that Nightingale just came out of Roland's room. The girl blushes after getting caught red-handed, asking her friend why she's still awake. In response, Wendy reminds her that the prince isn't a child, so sneaking around like that in the dead of night isn't the best move. The love-struck lady then mentions that news of the witch union's dissolution has already spread throughout the kingdom, so she's worried that some witches might try to harm the prince because of it. Wendy reassures her, saying the castle is fully guarded. Plus, the prince keeps a divine stone of judgment right under his pillow. As Nightingale undresses, her friend reminds her they're witches and can't have children. Blushing, Nightingale acknowledges this, but recalls the prince once said he wouldn't mind marrying a witch, and she believes he meant it. After freshening up, Nightingale flops back onto her bed and probs Wendy to spill something about the church. Her friend asks why she's suddenly interested in the church, and Nightingale reveals about the highly paid priest who visited our prince. The priest promised to support Roland to claim the throne, even though the prince wasn't keen on cooperating. That priest still offered them 2 suspicious pills, supposedly blessed by the Holy City's prayer room. Nightingale asks her if she knows anything about these shady pills from her time at the Abbey. Wendy explains she doesn't know much, since the Abbey had high walls on all sides and she could only see the sky. Many young girls like her, who didn't know where they came from, lived there. There were also orphans and abandoned children taken in by the church, some even sold by their parents. She learned etiquette, singing, and reading there. But once she became an adult, she was sent away from the abbey. As she recalls her past, Wendy feels a chill run down her spine. Nightingale immediately hugs her to offer comfort and warmth, and Wendy embraces her friend in return. So, she goes on to explain that she spent about 10 years there until that fateful day arrived. Wendy's teacher forcefully dragged her to a prison cell that day, where she was abruptly thrown into a dimly lit room. The stern woman who tossed her inside warned Wendy not to ask questions and just endure it. With those curt words, she slammed the door shut, leaving poor Wendy alone in the darkness. As Wendy looked around, a chilling sense of dread washed over her. There were priests with whips in hand, already mercilessly beating another girl. When they turned their attention to Wendy, a terrifying chill ran down her spine. These filthy, vile individuals seemed pleased to have another victim. Once the other girl lost consciousness from their torture, they turned their attention to Wendy. They approached her like demons, their eyes gleaming with sick intentions. To them, she was just another choir girl with a developed body, ripe for their cruel desires. They lunge at her, grabbing her by her long hair, tears streaming involuntarily down her face. The brute slams her against the gate, covering her mouth with his hand, warning her not to make a scene or scream because it'll all be over soon. As this filthy dude slips his hand under her skirt, Wendy's soul shatters, her eyes going numb. As the vile man enjoys himself, a sudden punch lands squarely on his face, snapping his neck and sending him crashing to the ground, blood pooling around him. The one who delivered the knockout blow is none other than the same girl who had endured their torture for too long. After seeing her released from her shackles, the other guy lunges at her, but with a single punch, she puts a hole in his gut. Then, with her bare hands, she takes down the other one too. Wendy is totally freaked out by all this madness. One of the men pulls out his stone of divine judgment, wondering if she's awakened her powers. The woman raises her ridiculously long, stretchy leg and brings it crashing down on the man's head, scrambling his brains completely. Once all the priests are down, Wendy still trembles in fear, while the other girl calmly walks towards the gate, standing defiantly as knights rush into the room. The sight of the dead men left the arriving woman utterly shocked. She collapses to the ground in terror, and one of the knights swings his sword, but the girl dodges every attack effortlessly. The knight keeps coming at her, but the girl grabs his hand and twists it so hard she tears it off from his body. The other soldier by the gate freezes in shock. Without missing a beat, she jumps up and tears him apart before anyone can blink. Word spreads like wildfire that there's a demon in the cell, and this girl takes on every knight like it's nothing, while Wendy just watches in horror. She's ruthless, stabbing the knight in the back with her spear without showing any emotions over her face. More soldiers swarm in, trying to surround her, but as they charge, she gets serious, swinging her sword so fast it's a blur, cutting through them like they're nothing more than cucumbers. Meanwhile, the terrified Wendy crawls toward her teacher's body, grabbing the key she needs. And with that, the flashback ends. Wendy explains that thanks to that girl, she managed to escape from the abbey. Using a few silver royals she took from the dead, she wandered until she arrived in the Seawind region. 2 years later, she awakened and became a witch, bringing her story to an end. She later heard that the church covered up the incident, claiming it was a fire. She doesn't know what became of that girl or the other girls abandoned at the abbey. Nightingale felt deeply saddened by Wendy's story, as she could relate to her pain. She grabbed her friend's hand, offering the warmth and love she needed. In the next scene, we've got Baldy turning all red, like radiating this intense crimson aura. Our best knight Carter is duking it out with him, and he appears to be seriously struggling. Looks like Prince gave this bald dude that power-boosting pill to see if this pill is actually a real deal or it's just hot air. Judging by how our knight's having a tough time, that pill's definitely packing a punch. Anna is excited to see this inmate holding his own against Carter, who is one of the strongest knights around. Prince Roland is also impressed, realizing the priest wasn't lying after all. He can only imagine what kind of combat power a trained knight would have if they took the same power-boosting pill. This seemingly random guy is giving Carter a tough fight, despite not being a knight or soldier. As the fight goes on, our knight finally lands a critical hit, making the red guy spit blood. However, he quickly recovers and charges back at Carter, who retaliates and disarms him with a single blow. The knight acknowledges the man's skill and calls for another sword. But just then, the furious man spots people watching from above the wall. When he locks eyes with the prince, his rage intensifies, and he immediately turns towards him. Seeing this threat to the prince's life, the knight orders the soldier to shoot down the prisoner immediately, and the gunman quickly opens fire, pumping bullets into his back. However, the guy doesn't seem to be affected by the bullets, so Carter quickly commands his soldier to bring him his horse. But it's too late. The prisoner takes a stance and effortlessly leaps over 30 feet into the air. Just as he's about to strike our hero, Anna jumps in and uses her fiery powers to start roasting him alive. When that isn't enough, Nightingale joins in, quickly slashing him with her sword to immobilize him. That crazy guy caused quite a scene,